I mean, I had, in the last presentation, a guy said 7 million. Where did you even? Yeah. So, so the gist of it is that the research actually tells us this. It says that people absorb information and their memory recall is going to vary. It's going to differ based on how the information is received. All right? So you all just received the hard facts. You just received lots of numbers and different statistics. That was a very left-sided, left-brained article there. So we remember about 5 to 10% of that, okay? Not very good. 90 to 95% gone, all right? Well, let's add another layer. Let's add some sort of visual imagery. That could be a photograph, that could be a table, a diagram, a call-out box, whatever it is. Well, that's a little bit better at this point, okay? It's still not enough, right? If our goal is really to compel the reader, to make them care about this issue, to make them understand, we still got to do better, right? And so we add on story, okay, on top of the visuals and on top of the data. Now we are moving. It may not get any better than that because humans are really quite complicated there. So overall, I'm not saying that data is confusing and so forth. It's just that we are not designed to remember it. It is a mechanism for change in truth. It's a very valuable asset, but overall, we need more in order to engage the reader and allow them to remember it, to make them feel it. We need them to humanize the data in a way. So if we want people to remember and do something and to care about something, we need to add in that other element, the story and the visual. And so why is that? Well, let's go back to this. Actually, let's go back. There we go. Why is that? Well, in terms of how we are wired, we have two sides of our brain. We have the right side of the brain and the left side of the brain, right? The left side of the brain oversees all of the analytical processing. So we need that for the data. But the right side of the brain is what's going to connect us to the story and how we visually process things and so forth. So in order to really compel the reader to connect them, we want to activate both sides. We want to involve both sides of the brain. So that's really our focus here for today. And I want you all to think about your style, what you prefer as a reader, but also as a writer or designer. Just think about that throughout our talk today. So going back to that article that was very data heavy, very data rich here. And so at this point, this style of writing is not really going to compel us. So using the odometer as an indicator of change or connecting to the reader and so forth, 5% recall, we're really crawling at this point. So if we add on another, next we'll add on a visual, we'll add a table, a trend line, we'll color code it, it's directional, we can see peaks or where it dips down and so forth. We can see years. Well, that is now activating the right side of the brain. All right, we're going to remember a little bit more here. But what if I asked you, do you remember in what year it peaked? 2008? Anybody else? Do you remember what color the line was? Okay. Do you remember when it dipped?
15?
All right, so let's take a look.
Years ago.
So it
Nice.
peaked in 16, is that right? Am I reading that right? No, 17, dipped down in 15, as well as down in 12, 11, so forth. So, I mean, it's helpful, but let's add another layer, okay? Now we're adding in the story. We're reading about the victims of these breaches. We're seeing their photo. We're understanding the implications of these breaches in their life, okay? So that's adding that third layer to this product here. We also see the statistics. We have different visuals. We have different colors. We understand the actual impact on our economy and so forth. So at this point, we're cruising, right? This now we're understanding more. We can connect. this is really engaging the reader in a way and making them understand it in a completely different way. So data storytelling is responding to all of that. It's taking that research and it's building it into its framework. Data storytelling is equal parts data analysis, story, as well as design. So this is the three-legged stool that we'll continue to reference throughout the next few slides here. So within the middle, we can see what's happening in terms of the impact on the reader. They're able to interpret, they're able to clarify, engage, and ultimately, hopefully they'll be propelled to actually do something, make a better decision, personal action, enact policy, change the world, and so forth. So we're going to go through each of these steps here, not too in-depth, but get you an overall feel of the process. This is a process and a workflow. I don't want us to focus too much on the start and stop points, as I know that may be a little different in the newsroom as topics, as issues, as current events arise. So step one is analysis, but even before analysis, so I guess step 0 is having good data, right? Good data in is good data out, and that's the same for garbage. If we're doing garbage data out. So we really want to make sure we trust our data. We want to be sure we do that before we run and conduct those different analyses. Analysis is different than just adding or reporting on data, okay? So we're actually conducting some sort of analysis. We're digging into the data set, asking questions, and so forth. This is very, very complex, and there's a lot to it, but I'll just break it down into 2 basic steps here. The first is exploratory. So we have our data set. We're scanning the landscape of it, okay? We're starting to see red flags. We're starting to see trends. We're seeing dark spots and bright spots, and we're starting to ask questions in those areas. Then we start to really isolate. We're saying, what's happening here? What's happening there? And so once we finish with the questions, we take it another layer down, and that's the explanatory. So then we're starting to look for explanations. We've isolated those red flags, any sort of trends or whatever's emerged, any sort of surprises, and then we're going to dig down into that. So when did that happen? Well, has this been happening for several years? Has this happened in other regions? And so forth. So you're asking these questions, and then you're looking for explanations there. And then before you know it, a story starts to emerge when you start with the analysis, in this case at least. And so through a story, the story is going to really give life to the data there. Now we're going to contextualize it. During what time period, right? We're going to, who is this involving? As this, in what geographic regions? We're adding in some conflicts, some plot twists. Are there any surprises? What are the highs? What are the lows? We're giving, and so forth. And then finally, we don't want any sort of a cliffhanger here. We want to wrap it up nicely and give the reader some sort of call to action, whether they can learn more. You can click on another link. You could ask a question. You link to an actual source of data, and so forth. So now that we have our story, we're going to take it over to the designer side, right? This is an integrated process. The people, the individuals involved are continuing to collaborate across those 3 areas. And so the designer is going to consider the layout, right? And they're going to know that most of us in the world, we read from left to right. So they're creating movement on the page, and that most of the information that's consumed is on the top left of the page, right? They're considering calling out whatever plot twists or any tension points in the data, any highlights that the reader needs to grab quickly and not have to dig for. And they're also using appropriate colors and labels both within the data as well as in the narrative. So that part of the process is aligning with the story, but we also want the next step to be that the design is saying what the data is saying, right? Not what you, the author, wants it to say there. So the design is also remaining objective. It's not misleading, overstating, or understating anything. Design is it's a huge influencer. It can weaponize the data, it can weaponize the story as well. So we want to be sure that we aren't misleading or skewing our reader. And so when I think about the different kind of buckets of visualization, I think of these three. And that's the first one, hedonistic visualization, and second one being story, and the third one being problem-solving visualization. The first one is when it just looks really cool, right? If the goal of design is to bring clarity, this one definitely doesn't really deliver, but it's catchy and might grab the reader and bring them in, right? It may have, a visualization that you've never even seen before, and you may need to spend time with it. The second part is, I think, more of a journalistic or perhaps a scientific approach, and that's when the visualization is actually aligning directly with the story, with the narrative. And then the third one, I see a lot in the public health space, and these tend to be, it's the problem-solving one. These tend to have the so what. They respond to that so what question. Oftentimes we'll look at a table and we see the trends, we understand that it's significant, but so what does that actually mean, right? You're actually still left with questions and so forth. So whenever I think about this, I'm like, yes, this is what we need more of, the problem-solving visualization. It's more of the infographic. It connects different tables. It tells a little bit of story. It actually asks questions and responds to it and so forth. And I think this approach really aligns with the data storytelling framework in that it's getting to the answers of the questions before the reader even asks those questions. And so that's really the framework here, and you can see that action is at the center here. We want to move them. We want to propel them to do something, right? We don't want to confuse them or mystify it. We want to take away that, demystify it, and make it pretty obvious what we're trying to say here. So again, the start and stop is not as important. I'm normally talking to a more of an analyst crowd here, but when I give this talk, and so here I think it may need to shift a little bit, and you guys would probably know, how the process starts and stops, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think the really big takeaway is that this is equal parts. Those three pieces have equal importance here. And so I think that's the necessity within this framework from an operational standpoint. So